Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Holtain. I am the Executive Director of the Victoria Law Foundation, and it is our enormous pleasure to have you with us this pretty chilly Melbourne morning for our Research Network event on identifying and responding to need. I'll introduce our three speakers very soon, but first, it is my pleasure and honour, as always, to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are sitting this morning, wherever you may be, recognising their abiding connection to this land, its waterways and its community. I come to you this morning from Boonwurrung country, and the offices of the Victoria Law Foundation stand on Wurundjeri land, both of the Kulin Nation. We recognise their abiding connection and its and the fact that these lands were never ceded. I pay my respects to elders and to all the generations who have nurtured this land over the last 50,000 years and continue to do so. We believe at the Foundation that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better and more equitable future. We recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice, and the marginalisation of Torres Strait and Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal peoples. We aim to break down the barriers to justice for all Victorians through our work in research, education, and grants, and we are committed to making a sincere and positive contribution to a better justice system for all of us, especially those who are vulnerable and most in need. The topic today, identifying and responding to need, is something of a hot one at the moment, it would seem. There is some very impressive work being done both around Australia and internationally on this, and some really important and I think applicable tools being developed. And we'll talk about a number of those dimensions as this morning progresses. We're going to hear first, though, from Hugh McDonald, and then a bit of a tag team with Nigel Balmer. And Baird from Victoria Legal Aid, who has been leading their data discovery work, will join us also for further discussion. Before we set sail, let me just give you some housekeeping tips. Only the panellists will be seen and heard in this webinar, and all attendees' videos are off and your audio is muted, as you've probably already gathered. But please feel free to use the chat function at any time, introduce yourself and make comments as the discussion proceeds. The Q&A function, though, is what we'll be using for our questions at the end of the event. And you can post your own question or, of course, upvote others that you see that hit the mark in terms of the responses that you'd like to hear. And we'll get to those at the end of the presentations. We are also recording today's event, so that will be distributed afterwards. And if you have leave for whatever reason, or if you want to distribute it more widely, then we'd love you to do so. So let's get this show on the road, and let me introduce you to the first couple of our speakers. Hugh McDonald, who is our principal researcher at the Victoria Law Foundation. He came to us in September in 2019. Previously, you may know his work from the Law and Justice Foundation in New South Wales, where he was very, very involved in many landmark access to justice and legal needs projects. So his experience in this sphere is deep and long. Throughout his career, Hugh has been closely involved with legal aid commissions and community legal centres and state and federal governments, and he's given them a deep understanding of legal institutions and access to justice issues throughout Australia. So Hugh is going to present for about 20 minutes, and then followed by a short to and fro with Nigel Balmer, whom you may well know is our research director here at the Victoria Law Foundation, and who came just a bit over a year before Hugh in December of 2018. He is the first man to hold this post, and he's been, as you're probably keenly aware, conducting empirical research of legal needs varieties for over 20 years, and is expert in the application of social science and modern quantitative techniques to explore how the public understand and interact with their law. Nigel's research includes work on the role of law in everyday life, attitudes to justice, public experience of and response to legal issues, the interaction between legal and health problems, the design of legal services and legal aid. He's best known probably for his work on legal needs surveys around the world, including the recent guidance, which has become, I think, a critical document supporting global access to justice initiatives under the UN Sustainable Goal number 16. Nigel is also the Honorary Professor of Law and Social Statistics at University College London. So he'll be along shortly. Allow me to introduce you first to Hugh McDonald, our principal researcher, for his short presentation on identifying need. Hugh.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I will kick off. So, unless someone tells me, I'm assuming people can see my slides. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm sitting on Wurundjeri land today, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, to all the generations of Wurundjeri and to other First Nations people, and acknowledge that the lands were never ceded. So what are we talking about today? Identifying need, responding to need. I'm going to speak a little bit about needs, what type of needs, what is that we're talking about. And at the end, I'm going to point to some missing pieces of the access to justice puzzle, which we need to fill out to get better at particularly responding to needs. So what needs? Broadly, we'll be talking about what's widely and commonly called legal needs. So that is situations and events where law is potentially relevant and potentially provides solutions when problems and disputes arise. But because law governs so much of the events, the transactions, the everyday interactions that we take for granted, from the most mundane to the most life-changing, legal needs are potentially everywhere. But they often arise at the interface of everyday life and adversity. It's common to distinguish between expressed and unexpressed or latent legal need. Legal needs are expressed when someone seeks legal help, when they take legal action in response to a problem. But by acting in this way, they manifest their legal need, and importantly, they leave traces of that legal need behind in places like data records of legal assistance services, in courts and tribunal and other dispute resolution body data. So we can identify expressed legal needs from those sorts of records. However, legal need can also be unexpressed or latent. And unexpressed needs are much harder to know and measure because, unlike expressed needs, they don't leave traces behind anywhere often. And this is where legal needs survey research is so important. This provides a method to measure legal need that doesn't rely on people having or understanding their legal context or seeking legal help or taking legal action. And in a bit, Nigel's going to talk about our public understanding of law survey, which includes a legal needs survey. But just to round off the terminology, legal needs can also be met or unmet, or perhaps more accurately, they can be met, unmet, or partially met. But before going on much further, it's also useful to note that as we learn more from access to justice and legal needs research, we're learning more about how a range of factors that extend well beyond law can affect what people are able to do and achieve, and how those factors can form sometimes quite fierce access to justice barriers. And so we use the term legal capability to refer to the personal characteristics and competencies that are necessary for a person to resolve legal problems effectively. Note that this definition brings in everything that we know about systemic access to justice barriers, but it examines it from a person-centred focus. Importantly, personal needs affecting capability, they're multidimensional. And legal capability is not just about law, but it's also about personal qualities, such as knowledge, skills, psychological and emotional factors, and access to resources. These factors all overlap, and they're linked to, historic, social, economic disadvantage, and they can be mutually reinforcing and also mutually excluding. And because legal need and capability is related to social and economic advantage and disadvantage, legal needs are often related and associated with other health, social and community needs. Legal capability also sits in a broader social context, such as geographic location, local community, infrastructure, local environment. But importantly, knowledge and understanding of law is only one dimension, and the skill, the psychological and the other personal factors and resources also affect legal capability. But importantly, needs in any one of these dimensions can erode legal capability, and they can affect legal problem experience and problem solving. So what do we know about legal need and capability? Well, we know that legal problems are common and widespread. We know that there's inequity in legal need and capability, and we see this in the legal problem vulnerability and in the ability to deal with problems effectively. And it crosses the whole spectrum from legal problem experience, handling, resolution, outcomes, and consequences. Legal needs are also linked to legal matter, so things like severity, problem type, recency, and demographic characteristics. So, for example, Law and Justice Foundation's Legal Australia-wide survey found elevated prevalence on one or more prevalence measures for people with a disability, single parents, the unemployed, those living in public and social housing, those whose main income is government benefits, Indigenous Australians, and those living in remote and regional areas. Social disadvantage is also linked to higher needs, including both legal problem and legal capability needs. So those that are most disadvantaged and vulnerable to legal problems also tend to have lower legal knowledge, awareness of not-for-profit legal services, self-help skills, and personal resources to deal with their legal problems without help. More disadvantaged people also tend towards delayed, crisis-driven help seeking, and they often require more intensive forms of assistance to effectively resolve their legal problems. And importantly, legal problems don't exist in isolation. They occur in clusters, and they often coexist with other related needs. And legal problems can both result from broader social problems, as well as exacerbating and entrenching disadvantage. So this diversity of legal need and capability suggests a few things. It suggests there's no one-size-fits-all responses to legal need that are likely to be suited and effective for all. This means that we need multifaceted responses, and it points to the importance of a person-centred focus and of targeted and tailored responses that consider people's legal capability needs, but a little bit more of that later. So why identify needs? Well, there's a number of reasons. I guess to see if services and systems are meeting needs. Are they making a difference? Are they fulfilling their purpose? We might be interested in identifying gaps and shortfalls. We might be interested in questioning if the response that we've made is appropriate. Is the response sustainable? Are there other things that we should do? Should other things potentially be more useful and effective. But ultimately, the more we learn, the more we can improve, and the better services we can offer, the better responses we can make to access to justice needs. But these are hard questions, and they go to questions of worthiness and value. But ultimately, it's where difference can be made. I guess, like response to legal need more broadly, there's no single way to identify and respond to needs. There's no magic formula and there's no single data source. And I guess this is because legal assistance and other justice institutions all have different purposes and roles. But one place to start is needs assessment and questioning whether the needs that have been identified are being met. And there's growing research and a research evidence base and a range of new useful tools that are becoming available that can help with these questions. Identifying and responding to need, it tends to be iterative, it tends to be periodic. So, as the title today suggests, there's a period of identification, a period of response, but really that's an ongoing exercise, and certainly something that can be continually questioned and continually considered. And in fact, that's what I would urge happens. So one approach to identifying and responding to need is by thinking evaluatively. In this approach, identification and response to need is an ongoing activity. It involves thinking, collecting information, and making, I guess, data-led decisions, or at least data-questioned decisions. And this sort of approach overlaps with, other aspects of organisational, strategic and service planning, and with things such as the collaborative service planning under the National Legal Assistance Policy. The cycle, as depicted here, it notionally starts with identifying need. So what's needed? Why? Are there service gaps? Do you think that the needs are being identified? Are being met? How do you know? Is there any baseline information? Does service data tell you anything? When needs have been identified, there's a period of planning. What do you want to do to respond to the need that's been identified? Can you design something to do that? If you've got something in mind and you want to develop something, well, it needs to be implemented. A good place to start is by testing it, either user testing, pilot testing. Does what you've designed appear to be useful? Is it working? How do you know? Are there changes that need to be made? Once you think you've got something refined that's going to be useful and beneficial, it needs to be rolled out and operated. And at this point, might want to think about evaluation down the track. You might want to be collecting information that will help you to do evaluative work and to think evaluatively about the response to the need that you've identified. When it comes to evaluation, I guess you're looking at whether what you have come up with fulfills its purpose. Does it appear to be meeting the needs that have been identified? And importantly, how can you know? And this is where data collection can be really useful. And certainly at the foundation and later, I think it's really useful and beneficial to have a well-considered evaluation so that we can learn as much as possible about the response, what works, what doesn't work, to identify insights and importantly, to then share those insights more broadly so that other people can learn from the activity that you've been doing. And when it comes time to act on that evaluation, that involves asking questions about whether you should continue what you're doing, whether you should maybe stop and do something else, and whether there are new needs that you've identified that need to be addressed perhaps in a new way. And then the cycle begins again. And the cycle potentially runs at both, say, an organisational level, a program level, or perhaps with needs for a particular type of legal matter or a particular type of population group. So how identify needs? Well, really what I've just provided some insight to is it's really about asking, listening, analysing, reflecting. There are certain things we can look at, research and policy and other information gathering, but it's also asking and talking to people, being inquisitive, thinking evaluatively, collecting information and data, and questioning what needs this might be suggesting. And there are also guidance tools that are available. So one way of asking people about their legal needs is through legal needs surveys. And so legal needs surveys are now well established and they're common around the world, particularly Hazelden's widely influential Pathways to Justice survey and the English and Welsh Civil and Social Justice surveys really sparked renewed interest in legal needs surveys research. And we now see a lot of that research happening around the world, including the Law and Justice Foundation in New South Wales Legal Australia Way survey in 2012. I don't really have time to review that evidence, other than to say that the growing body of legal needs survey research confirms inequality in experience and handling of legal problems. Qualitative research also provides insight about legal and related needs and helps further build the evidence base. So qualitative legal needs research is often based on interviews, on case studies, on observation and the like. And they have advantages in terms of investigating people's experiences and their perspectives about law in an in-depth way. And it can investigate particular population subgroups and particular legal issues. Again, the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales has published qualitative research on the legal needs of older people, homeless people, people with mental illness, prisoners. And I think from our vantage point today, we can see that this research was well ahead of its time, and it predated interest and policy interest in some of those groups. And importantly, qualitative research, it also complements and fills out some gaps in quantitative legal needs surveys. With respect to public legal assistance, national policies also provides some guidance on the objectives, outcomes of national legal assistance funding. And this is broadly consistent with the research findings, and it puts a focus on people facing disadvantage and specific national priority client groups. So the national policy suggests that legal assistance services should be planned and focused to those falling within one or more of the national priority client groups. And so these are all groups where research has shown either elevated needs stemming from vulnerability to legal problems or constrained or lower legal capability. Other empirical information gathering techniques are also commonly used to identify and spot how needs might be changing, or to identify new needs that may be emerging. So again, broadly engaging, asking, listening, talking to people can help identify needs. Asking about how things are going, what are you seeing, are things changing, is anything new, what's working, what's not working, why is that? Questions like that. And so, for example, user and client surveys can provide information about needs and experiences, and this often includes things like satisfaction, outcomes, and even things such as legal health checks, which are a technique for scanning for legal needs. But more broadly, making time to take stock, to question, to investigate, to reflect, to gather anecdote and observation can also give rise to issues for further investigation and interrogation using other information and data sources, including service and administrative data. So service and administrative data can provide insights about legal needs, information about who is getting legal help, who is involved in the justice system and for what. But remember, because service data is a measure of express needs, it only tells us part of the picture. It can't tell us much about those who haven't made it to legal assistance or to justice institutions such as courts and tribunals, although it can be used to infer gaps between likely need and express need. So for example, where a subgroup who's likely to have legal needs is underrepresented in data, this may point to unexpressed or unmet legal need. And so gap analysis can promote further investigation of access to justice barriers and promote further service innovation. But the use and utility of this data depends on its accuracy, consistency, and quality. And as we've seen from our research mapping of Victoria's civil justice data, which you can find some more about on our website. While service data can provide information about people providing services, it doesn't necessarily mean that the service they received was sufficient to meet that need. And there is more we need to know on this front, which I'll come to in a tick. In terms of legal service data, much more is also known about public rather than private legal assistance. So other than legal needs surveys, data on private practitioners and data on private practitioners who do legally aided work, and some information from regulatory bodies, the visibility of private legal assistance service of private legal services remains quite low. And there are a number of explanations for this, which again, I don't have time to go into. There are also a number of well-established indicators and some new data tools that can help you to quickly begin to explore the geography and the demography of legal need. So the Law and Justice Foundation in New South Wales' Need for Legal Assistance Services, or NLAS indicator, is based on findings from the Legal Australia-wide survey, and it uses ABS census data to calculate indicators to identify those who are likely to need legal assistance services to effectively resolve legal problems. And so the LJF has calculated several different NLAS indicators, including indicators for needs stemming from low capability, from low income, from older age, and from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander status, as well as indicators for national priority client groups and other useful demographic groups. The LJF has also recently provided this information via a new national legal needs dashboard, which makes it easy to explore indicators by geography. And further information and guidance is available on their website. And for those of us in Victoria, Victoria Legal Aid has also developed a data discovery tool that similarly allows investigation of legal need by geography using the NLAS indicators, some demographic characteristics, along with some Victorian service data. but Marie will speak more about that shortly. There's also other population and service data that might be useful. Okay, because of what we know from the findings of legal needs research and what we know about those who are likely to experience legal need and capability issues, other data sets and tools can also be potentially useful. So for example, the ABS interactive maps of statistical data for at-risk populations overlaps in many respects with known drivers of legal need. So that's another tool that can be useful. There's also various state and local government data that might provide insights for particular population groups. And again, because of the overlap in the interface between criminal and civil justice needs, things like victimisation data can be informative. And Victoria's Crime Statistics Agency has a useful family violence data portal. And if she's on the line, thanks again to Liz Curran for bringing that to my attention. So there are numerous examples of potentially useful data sources, although they may be difficult to find and require some sort of searching. This is also another reason why there's no single approach to legal needs analysis and investigation, because for any particular thing that you might be interested, there may be one or more potentially useful data sources. There's also some guidance material on legal needs identification and response, and service planning, and examples of legal needs assessments. So these again include materials from the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. There's an example of a review of legal need and services in Western Australia. Community Legal Centres Queensland's done some work on evidence and analysis of legal need. And there's new guidance work, which is hot off the press, from Community Legal Centres Australia on legal needs assessment and planning. And it sets out a useful data-informed approach and some useful ways about going about such work. And no doubt there's other useful materials, both in Australia and overseas. So how should we be responding to identified needs? Well, again, the research and policy is instructive. But while the evidence is growing slowly, both in Australia and internationally, there are enduring service challenges, both to service provision and evaluation to determine, what responses work or work best for different types of legal matters and for different types of people with diverse legal needs and capabilities. So after reviewing the access to justice and legal needs evidence, the Law and Justice Foundation in New South Wales's Reshaping Legal Assistance paper found that this evidence points to, or it suggests that to most effectively and efficiently assist those with a disproportionate amount of legal need, services should be increasingly client-focused. So this involves services being targeted to those with the highest legal need and lowest capability, that are joined up and integrated with other services to address complex life problems, that are timely to minimise the impact of problems and to maximise the utility of services, and that are accessible and appropriate to the needs and capabilities of users. The National Strategic Framework for Legal Assistance is in similar terms, and it sets out 6 principles for legal assistance services. So namely, focus service delivery on people facing disadvantage. Think about client-centred and appropriate services, collaboration and integrated approaches. The services should be appropriately timed and preventative. They should empower and build resilience. And importantly, there's opportunity for continuous learning and improvement about services. So responding effectively to diverse need and capability really requires a range of accessible services that are both appropriate and sustainable. It also anticipates a mix, or that there is a mix of services and service models that can be matched to need. But there are also key service challenges here that constrain responses to identified need, including the need to balance operating budgets. So in particular, funding challenges constrain response to identified need, especially when that need outstrips supply. And this is really where hard choices need to be made about what services are provided and what service eligibility should be. So ideally, we would be able to respond to identified needs on the based on knowledge of what works. For example, ideally, we'd be able to assess a person's legal needs and capability and triage them to services we know are appropriate and will work. And as we learn more about what is appropriate and what works, we would also adjust both service design and triage practices. But again, the what works evidence base is slowly building, and it's where we need more evaluative work to be done and more rigorous evaluations, and we need more sharing of evaluation insights and lessons. And again, there's probably much to learn from evaluation and service design efforts, both in Australia and globally. I just want to return and circle back to evaluative thinking. So this really goes hand in hand with efforts to build the what works evidence base. So we're talking about identifying needs, designing, implementing and operating responses, and then critically evaluating and learning from those responses. However, there's also several missing pieces of the puzzle that we need to fill to be able to respond appropriately, sustainably and effectively to needs. This includes measurement and understanding of service outcomes and what inputs produce what level of outcomes. We need to know more. We need to know what service responses achieve and whether they meet users' legal needs and capabilities. Are they helpful? Are they achieving their purpose? Do some services work better for some types of legal matters and some types of people than others? We also need to know more about the interrelationship between the public's understanding of law, legal capability, legal need, and problem solving. And so that's where our new public understanding of law survey in Victoria comes in. So over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Hugh. I'll just share my screen once yours is unshared. Hopefully that's working. Okay, so I'll just try and take you through our public understanding of law survey very briefly. I don't want to eat into Marie's time too much. But essentially, Hugh and Marie both talk about multiple data sources and approaches to understanding community needs. I'll just be discussing a single data source, so our public understanding of law survey. It's a large-scale survey of around 6,000 Victorian respondents, and it's looking at essentially how they understand, navigate the law and legal problems. We're about to start fieldwork, and we really think of it as evolution of the type of legal needs surveys Hugh was talking about. This is broadly what it looks like. So we have a brief introduction. We find out a little bit more about people, who they are. We take them through a range of hypothetical legal scenarios, look at their understanding of their rights, some aspects of legal capability. Then at the heart is this legal needs survey, which many of you will be familiar with the concept. So the idea is you look at people's experience of and response to problems involving rights. They may see them as legal, they may not. They may do something about them, they may do nothing. That's really key to the approach. We then go through a range of other measures of legal capability before finishing off with some sensitive demographics. Okay, so many of you know this, but very briefly, what is this legal needs survey business? Well, it came from an acknowledgement that if you just look at the tip of the iceberg at lawyer and court use, these people are anomalous. Most people with legal problems don't use lawyers, get nowhere near courts. And if you just look at this, you don't get everything you need to know to design services to respond to need. So you have to look below the surface. It's not a new idea. So the first legal needs survey was in the 1930s. But from time to time, they've kind of reached the limits of what they can do. There's this idea of evolution. So for example, there've been various points where they've said, well, what people do about problems, it's just about problem types. If you've got a family problem, you get legal advice. If you've got a consumer problem, you don't. Well, this isn't really very helpful. I'm not sure what you do service design-wise with that. So as a result, the surveys have evolved. They've started to find out more about who people are, starting to explore capabilities to try and get a more nuanced understanding of what people can do, what they want, what they need. And this has really been key to them maintaining relevance. So we're trying to shift the dial further still, to put far more focus on legal capability, to find ways to measure capabilities, and allowing you to go beyond just looking at problem prevalence to try and get a handle on legal need and unmet legal need. Why are we so interested in capability? Well, firstly, it allows us to design services that reflect how people see the world, but also it gets us closer to capturing legal need. So you might be thinking, well, can't we just look at capability and legal need already? And that kind of depends on how you think of those things. So Hugh's defined this in very simple terms. This is how I define legal capability. So it's the knowledge, skills, attributes, and resources you need to recognize, address, and resolve everyday legal problems. And there's a lot in it, as you mentioned. We can't capture all of it with Pulse, but we do try to measure some key ones. So things like how legally confident people are, whether they see the law when they're faced with problems, so do they see these things as legal, whether they have knowledge of rights, what we might think of as legal intuition, knowledge of advice services, whether they think courts and lawyers are for them, what they think the law is, what it does, and also some functional elements, so whether they have the nuts and bolts of the things we might think they would need to resolve some of these legal issues. And legal need, this is how I see it. So here it's used, it's a very broad term, but it's far narrower when it's defined elsewhere. So if you use my way of defining it, it's not about just problem experience, service use, people with particular characteristics. These might be related or they might be very rough proxies. This is how I defined it. So legal need we think of as when a shortage of legal capability means you can't resolve your everyday legal problems and need help to deal with them appropriately. And it's unmet when it's not dealt with appropriately because effective legal support is not available to try and make good this deficit of capability. If it's unmet, there's no access to justice. And ironically, legal needs surveys have rarely tried to measure legal need, but Pulse tries to get us a little bit closer by capturing some of these legal need capabilities, which are core to these ideas of legal need and unmet legal need. So what can it do? It can do quite a lot. So clearly we can find out how people understand and navigate law and legal problems. We can find out about problem prevalence, who has what. We can find out what impact COVID and bushfires have had on all of this. We can look at some key things we've been interested in over a long period of time. So problem clustering, how legal issues interact with other aspects of your life. We can capture aspects of legal capability and see who has more or less of it. And importantly, see how it relates to action and resolution. And hopefully this gives us evidence to think about where we might put services and interventions, what they might look like, what level of service different people might need, allow us to make stronger cases for funding, and hopefully make bottom-up policy decisions that reflect how people see the world, how they understand law, and what their needs are. Just finally, since Marie's going to talk about modelling efforts, I thought I'd just show you something from the past. So this is from 2008, one I made earlier, about how this sort of work can feed into modelling efforts. So they allow you to produce geographic models of problem prevalence, regardless of whether services were used, and of legal need and unmet legal need. So this one's of social welfare law problems in Plymouth. And it adds to the sort of conversations Hugh and Maria are talking about and complements efforts to model service use, service location, etc. So here we see red's bad, blue's good. So Devonport, that's somewhere where we'd expect high levels of death, benefits, problems. And that's a picture of Devonport on the top right there. And then on the right there, Plymstock, blue, far fewer social welfare problems. And that's Plymstock on the bottom right. So it looks on the basis the system might work, but it allows you to complement some of the work that, for example, the data discovery work that we used to talk about. And I'll wrap up there. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to get in touch and you can find out more about Pulse here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you very much, Hugh, as well. And we'll come back to you both very shortly for a broader discussion. But let me now introduce you to Marie Baird, who is our very special guest this morning from Victoria Legal Aid, where she is Service Design Lead for Services and Innovation Directorate. I think I've got that right, Marie. She and her team provide strategic advice and support to VLA and other sector partners in legal and need analysis and service planning and design. And she's previously worked in the community legal sector and community agencies and has a very deep commitment to helping make legal processes and systems work better for people who need them most. And Marie, congratulations on the data discovery tool. It's a very smart looking piece of tech, and we look forward to hearing more about that and where else you're headed. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for that, Lynn. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a moment. Great, I'm hoping that's coming up as well. So, thanks very much again, Lynn, for the introduction and the opportunity to present today. Before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues here today. So in today's presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the ways Victoria Legal Aid's supporting evidence-based planning work, both through legal needs analysis and service design, and by developing resources to support planning and data capacity building in the legal assistance sector. Excuse me, I'm having the obligatory problem moving a slide on. Excuse me for one moment. I'm just having trouble moving that slide on. So I'm just going to exit out of that and try and come back into it. So excuse me for one moment. Okay, hopefully that's working. Okay, thank you. Sorry, apologies for that. So VLA has made a strong commitment to taking a more evidence-informed, client-centred and collaborative approach to service development and design, underpinned by the three central principles of our Strategy 22. And they are clients, so listening to clients and responding effectively to their diverse needs. Together, being transparent, building trust and working collaboratively with partners. And impact, using evidence to inform how services are planned and delivered and to review and improve what we do. So this isn't to suggest that it's a done deal. We're doing some great work in some areas and still have a long way to go in others, but there's a genuine commitment to this work and it's exciting to be part of. So a bit about my team. VLA's regions and services function incorporates CLC funding and development, regional planning, Aboriginal services, and service design. And this is a really useful grouping for us because obviously there's a lot of crossover between these areas and a particular focus on service planning, priority clients, and access to justice across Victoria. The role of my team, sector engagement and service design, is to work with VLA, CLCs and justice partners to provide strategic advice, build capacity and deliver targeted assistance for evidence-based, collaborative and client-centred service planning and design. So how does VLA identify and respond to legal need? In the next section, I'm going to take you through some examples of recent work we've done to support evidence-based legal service design. And I'm also going to introduce the data discovery tool that Lynn mentioned, which is a resource we're about to launch to support data-informed service planning for CLCs and VLA. The first piece of work I'd like to discuss is the Family Law Project. Last year, we worked with VLA's Family Law team and Women's Legal Service Victoria to develop a statewide legal needs assessment to better understand unmet legal need for family law property and parenting legal services in Victoria. The project came about in response to the ongoing pressures impacting the family law system, including growing demand for family law services, the impact of limited funding, and a family law system in a state of flux. Project partners wanted to develop an evidence base that would help identify opportunities to improve existing services, maximise the impact of limited legal assistance funding, and find ways to address the family law supply issues collaboratively. So project partners worked together to identify appropriate indicators of family law legal need and to develop agreed definitions of met need and priority clients. As the collaborative planning process progressed, we tested and refined the indicators and definitions for relevance and utility to develop a credible and robust model to assess family law need. Ultimately, the agreed indicators were experience of domestic and family violence, so analysis by the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation of the Legal Australia-wide surveys, the Law Survey, found that the risk of experiencing a family law problem was 16 times higher for victim survivors of domestic family violence. Then age, so predictive modelling by the Attorney General's Department's Future Focus of the Family Law Services 2016 report identified age as the single most important demographic driver for out-of-court family law services, with people aged 25 to 49 significantly more likely to access these services than any other group. This meant high growth areas with lots of young families and lower overall incomes were likely to have higher demand for low-cost family law legal assistance. Single parents, so the Law Survey also found that family law problems were particularly prevalent for single parents with children at home. So 37% of respondents to the survey experienced such problems. And this group also found it particularly difficult to resolve legal problems without assistance. And finally, a more general indicator, low legal capability, the NLAS, the Need for Legal Assistance Services Capability Indicator, which was developed by the Law and Justice New South Wales, Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. And this indicator provides a count of people who are likely to need legal assistance should they experience a problem due to low levels of personal income and educational attainment. The Family Law Legal Needs Analysis brought together a broad range of data based on the identified family law correlations and other relevant information. As Hugh's already said, there's really no one source of truth when bringing together evidence of legal need. You need to draw on a range of data in order to develop an overall picture. We collected both quantitative and qualitative data to develop a comprehensive picture and ensure the experience of clients and practitioners was central to our thinking, and that we were testing the quantitative data with the practical experience of clients, practitioners, and other key stakeholders. The project partners also conducted client research to develop journey maps highlighting the experience of clients seeking legal help in the family law system. You can see in this example, the journey map identifies particular points visualised through the faces on the bottom, where Mindu's experience is negative or positive. These journey maps offered really useful insights into gaps in the system and, more importantly, kept participants focused on the very real impact the lack of available legal support has on vulnerable people. Ultimately, there were no real surprises in the project findings, which showed that the mixed model of service delivery is not meeting the demand for family law legal help, with declining numbers of panel practitioners doing legally aided work, limited CLC capacity for family law casework and representation, and the limitations of narrow legal aid eligibility guidelines on access to legal assistance. The work also highlighted the increased complexity in the needs of family law clients and the intersection between legal and non-legal needs. The work identified overall high unmet family law legal need across the state, but two major pockets stood out: the high growth outer metropolitan region in the west, stretching from Brimbank and as far as Greater Geelong, and in the northern border regions of Mildura, Swan Hill and Greater Shepparton. A key recommendation that came out of this work was to increase the capacity of CLCs to provide family law casework and representation. Drawing on the evidence collected during the Family Law Project, the partners secured some state and federal funding for a 2-year pilot project to develop family law legal practices at several generalist CLCs in Western Melbourne and Geelong, both to increase access to family law services and to establish a scalable model for other Victorian CLCs. The Family Law in the West pilot's been running for about 3 months now, and the new family law practices in the 3 CLCs are taking on clients. So maybe we can come back and tell you about this work as it progresses down the track. The second piece of work I'd like to discuss is a recent place-based planning project to support civil law service design in VLA's regional offices. VLA's civil justice programs made up of specialist civil teams based at our Bourke Street head office, and in most cases, 1 or at most 2 generalist civil lawyers providing services from each regional office. Civil regional services model differs significantly between offices in terms of supervision arrangements, integration with other practice areas, work focus, and relationships with local agencies. The broad scope of civil law presents some really great opportunities for innovative, collaborative, and client-centred place-based responses to need, but also means service parameters need to be clear and consistent so the civil services in the regions are focused on priority legal needs and groups rather than just reactive. Clear parameters and supervision structures are vital to the sustainability and viability of regional civil services. So late last year, the Civil Justice Program at VLA approached us to conduct a legal needs analysis to inform service planning and design decisions for two new civil lawyer roles in the Ballarat and Bendigo regional offices. Vacancies in adjacent regional catchments presented an opportunity to take a considered and collaborative approach, establishing an evidence base for local legal need, priority clients and key stakeholders to inform development of work plans for the roles and provide a clear framework to measure effectiveness and impact. The Ballarat and Bendigo catchments cover a very broad region stretching from the outskirts of Greater Melbourne to the border of New South Wales, and this presents a range of challenges in prioritising legal need and providing consistent services across the region. The analysis identified several regions, client groups and legal problems that were significant to the Ballarat and Bendigo region. The Central Goldfields and Swan Hill regions are among the top 10 LGAs in Victoria for civil legal need across multiple indicators, including housing instability and homelessness, social security problems, financial disadvantage and family violence. Priority groups in the regions included, in the region of interest, included a high proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experiencing financial disadvantage, particularly near the New South Wales border, and a significantly higher proportion of the population with a disability or mental health issue than state averages. Housing instability or homelessness and homeless instability or homelessness and family violence were notably high in the region of interest, indicating likely complex and intersecting legal need. The work also highlighted several broader themes, including the diversity in civil service models and approaches, even in response to common legal need and priority clients. The importance of strong local relationships with CLCs, health and community partners, and the specific challenges for regional civil lawyers in ensuring their work is effective and sustainable. The local priorities and opportunities for collaboration identified by the analysis ultimately formed the basis of work plans for the 2 civil lawyer roles. The roles started at the beginning of 2021, and both role holders and regional and civil program leadership have reflected on their significant value of the evidence-informed work plans in providing a clear and supportive foundation on which to establish a civil practice while remaining responsive to local need. The work plans included development of a monitoring and evaluation framework to measure progress and support the business case for ongoing funding of the roles. Data collected provides ongoing insights into effectiveness and impact. The Ballarat Bendigo highlights the value of programs and regional officers working together to develop evidence-informed insights that centre service planning and resourcing decisions on identified local need and priority clients. The work also emphasised the value of services doing this work together rather than in isolation, identifying common needs and priority clients and developing service responses collaboratively. The final piece of work I'd like to touch on is the data discovery tool. The data discovery tool brings together CLC and VLA service data along with population level demographic data, including indicators of legal need in a single entry dashboard. This tool is intended to be simple to use and to present data in an accessible and easily understood form that encourages exploration and builds confidence for users. So how does it work? Users select from a range of filters like location, including LGA and SA2, service provider, including VLA and CLCs, area of law, at this stage this is just civil, family and criminal law, client demographic, including priority indicators like age, homelessness and gender, and date range. The results are displayed as a heat map presenting a visual geographic comparison of where services are currently delivered. And then the data can also be downloaded as a table in Excel so that users can develop their own visualizations. The data can also be displayed in a range of visualizations in the tool, depending on what the user wants to explore or demonstrate. Finally, the user can also explore and compare legal needs data, including the need for legal assistance service indicators developed by the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation, and data for priority groups who are most likely to need legal assistance if they experience a legal problem. By comparing legal needs data with legal service data or met and unmet need, we can start to identify potential gaps in services and priority clients who are not receiving legal services. We developed the data discovery tools so that CLCs and VLA can view high-level legal service data by location, and so we can better understand who's providing what services where, gain greater insights into unmet legal need, and target our services to those who need them most. The tool will have a broad range of uses. So for example, generalist services looking for local delivery partnerships, specialists exploring service gaps statewide, policy officers seeking data to support submissions or grant applications, community legal education staff identifying priority regions, or managers developing a service plan for funders. The tool's been developed with the sector. So we've shaped and refined at each development stage from concept, wireframes, and now prototype with a range of users, including VLA and CLC staff, specialist and generalist services, and users at different levels of data skill, capacity, and confidence. Responses have been consistently positive, and as you can see from the examples here, they really highlight the immediate practical application that users can see for the tool. Testing processes also offered very specific feedback and insights on how to make it better. So we've been able to refine according to what's useful and the way that users engage with the resource. We also see this as very much a complementary tool that provides a unique set of data because it shows service data, but it also works in parallel with a much broader range of resources and initiatives in this space, including, of course, the VLF's Public Understanding of the Law Survey, and including the National Legal Needs Dashboard from the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation and the Federation of Community Legal Centres work in data capacity and data standards and sector capacity. And of course, we are continuing through our Community Legal Services program to offer support and resources for the sector as well. So this is very much the first step. We'll continue to work with the sector to enhance and update the tool. And as we get access to more data and user insights, we'll be able to expand what the tool can do and show. There's also potential down the track to connect in with other work. So, for example, again, the VLF's Public Understanding of the Law Survey to provide broader context for the work. I'm reluctant to use the journey word, but the legal assistance sector is on a data journey, and transparency and a level of vulnerability and messiness is key to making progress. We still have a way to go, but it's notable how much change has been in the past few years to a much more comprehensive valuing of data skills and resourcing to support effective decision making and service planning. We see this tool as both something immediately practical and useful, but also as an invitation to think about how we as a sector can address data gaps through changes in practice and, more importantly, how we can use evidence-informed approaches to make legal services work better for the people who need them most. So thank you all for listening, and here are my contact details if you'd like to get in touch.
Thank you ever so much, Marie. And can I invite Nigel and Hugh to join us again, and we'll open it up for questions. That was very, very interesting in terms of the diversity of activity that there is around identification of need. And I think to take Nigel's comments to where it's headed and what we can expect down the track. So please send us your questions through the Q&A, and I will get to them as best I can. First, a couple of of easy ones I think we can knock over. Where can the assessment tools be found? So, Marie, when will data discovery, for example, be available more broadly?
So we're at that messy end of tool development where we keep thinking it's ready to go and then we get other little glitches. But we are now working on the basis of a start of August for rolling it out more broadly. We are doing obviously quite a lot of work with the sector already in kind of testing and discussing and showing, but it should be broadly available in August.
Great. So back end of 2021, that's terrific. And one just further question, and I hope that it's not putting you on the spot. Are you all happy to share your slides more broadly?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Good. Okay. we can distribute those when we send out the video of the recording as well. So thank you for that. So I think, what I saw out of the three presentations was, as we've described, a spectrum, if you like, of the ways in which we can identify legal need. And Hugh, had a very organisationally focused approach with the evaluative approach, which is, as you said, Hugh, very consistent with strategic planning. You identify and you plan and you test and you deliver, and the circle is never complete. You keep just going and going and going. It's a sort of continuous improvement model. And then there's the sorts of projects that you describe, Marie, the Women's Legal Service project and the Civil Regional one, which are very detailed and deep dive investigations of particular issues in particular locations. And then there's the data discovery tool, which is a much broader scope and intended for different purposes. And then at the other end, we've got Pulse, which is, a thing unto itself because it is a new construct. But I suppose in all of these, I'm interested to know how they fit together, how people are going to use them to actually identify need on the ground where they need to get at it, and what the capability is in the sector for applying all these new tools and opportunities. I know it's a big question, but I wondered if you'd thought through the sort of interaction, if you like, of all these possibilities and how people will actually, corral them to good purpose. Hugh, have you given that some thought?
I guess I come at this from the point of view of a self-interested researcher. So I'm always looking to learn. And I think as a researcher, because I don't provide legal assistance services, there's a lot that I can learn and that other researchers can learn from those that actually do provide legal assistance services. And so that's where I'm self-interested in terms of wanting more and better and more rigorous evaluation so that we can learn more And certainly from my experience of every research project, of everything that I've worked on with legal assistance providers, they're all opportunities for learning, and they all contribute to building understanding and building the evidence base. And I think what we heard today was the tremendous crossover between research, between service planning, service efforts, service projects, including, crossover between research information, service information. So I think it's a continuous activity. There's a lot of learning that is happening and that needs to continue to happen. And of course, the capability aspects of doing this sort of work is also where we need to focus some sort of efforts. And again, there's more that can be learned from those who are doing it, from having the opportunities to sit down and talk to each other, to reflect on experiences. Because of the nature of the service challenge here, a lot of the experiences are common. So people are not dealing with problems for the first time, but they might, or service challenges for the first time. But there may be opportunities to learn from what others are doing, some shortcuts that can be taken, some getting to insights quicker. So rather than reinventing wheels, we learn from what's gone before. So yeah, that's sort of view, and it might be rose tinted, but that's a sort of view I take.
Well, you very neatly anticipated a question we've had through from Youth Law about the possibility of developing some generic materials, if you like, some evaluation surveys, some documents that everybody can share, because as they point out, and as you have too, a lot of the work is very similar across CLCs, for example. I mean, clearly there are variations depending on where you are and who your neighbours are, but as you said, a lot of this stuff has been trod before, and there has to be a way to ensure that people have access to materials that cut through a whole lot of stuff that they may not otherwise need to build from scratch. So the question was basically, can we develop common materials? And then I like this part too, of course, we could then opt in to share that data with the VLF to analyse. Very happy about that data sharing opportunity. But Marie, in your travels around the sector, are you seeing, and I suppose we're thinking sectorally now, and I really wanted to talk about people and citizens and users in a moment, but let's just talk for a little bit longer about organisations and how they use this stuff. Are you hearing an appetite for those kinds of generic, for want of a better word, approaches that can then be adjusted and amended to particular circumstance? Because that's, after all, what data discovery is about, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's a real need for that consistency, because I think people really are struggling with concepts that are relatively new, and there seems to be lots of variations on, but are speaking to similar kind of areas. And so that sense of a common language, some shared terminology, some shared understanding, so that we are all of us using roughly the same way of talking about the various aspects of legal need, would go a long way, I think, in terms of providing a bit of confidence that this isn't just this ridiculous morass of kind of academia, and is actually something that has really immediate practical relevance to day-to-day service provision. So I do think that it's really timely to be thinking about how we all work together to simplify, to define, to provide mechanisms and templates that are useful. All of those things, I think it's really definitely timely and really relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just listening to your presentations, there is so much potential, and so many other data sources that both you and Hugh pointed to that could be brought in if you have the time and the expertise to do that, but not everyone does. And so making this as accessible to planners and decision makers in community legal contexts is going to be a really important next development. Got a couple of questions we might deal with very quickly, and then I'd like to turn to how people experience the law and what identifying need does for users. Thank you for your question about the Public Understanding of Law Survey. The first report will be down, fingers crossed and all things being equal, COVID particularly, mid next year. So June, July 2022 is the deadline that we have for that. And we expect the first cut of data to be delivered to us at the end of this year after the surveys have been completed. Are you going to nod in agreement, Nigel?
I am, yes. And I should say we'll also, for those who are interested, be making the data available for people who like to work with it and answer their own questions.
Absolutely, I was going to mention that too. And to Barbara's question, no, this webinar does not attract CPD points. We are we're not a training organisation. This is just for your further information. Another one to Hugh. You mentioned that there are various reasons why there's little visibility of private legal services. Could you explain a little bit further about that? That was one of those things that you felt you didn't have a lot of time to go into, but can you expand just briefly on that?
They're private services. Law firms are separate businesses. They operate separately. They're competitors with each other. Information is often commercial in confidence. We know there's a lot of innovation that's going on in the private legal service sphere around use of legal technology, data systems, casework management systems, but that information just tends to be held more tightly compared with public legal services, where there's some sort of expectation that the public has a right to know what's happening in public services. So that's a fundamental distinction.
Do we know what percentage of legal services are provided privately over publicly?
Not really,
Not really, no.
Not really apart from the legal needs survey research. So Nigel may be able to speculate on that more broadly. And he might have some interest also, because private legal services also, obviously, a lot of their business is catering to businesses. And there are business legal needs surveys that have been done.
Anything to add there, Nigel?
No, I mean, I'm not in a position to speculate, and I would say that even legal needs surveys are going to give you a really rough idea of what that ratio is. So yeah, I mean, Hugh's absolutely right there. Yeah.
I'm really interested, as I would be, I suppose, to talk about legal need and legal capability, and the way you present the questionnaire, Nigel, that's in development for the Pulse survey, which is about to go into the pilot phase. We've got legal capability sandwiching the legal need elements of the questionnaire. So legal capability is very clearly a focus. Is it the Holy Grail? Does legal capability fundamentally change our understanding of legal need? I suppose what I'm asking is, if I to think about Marie's circumstance, could a better understanding of legal capability fundamentally change the eligibility criteria, for example, around who gets services out of VLA?
Look, I mean, on the first point, yeah, it takes us like way further down the road. So when I talked about we hit roadblocks, so we found out that problem type swamps other considerations, right? That wasn't helpful. Then we find the demographics come in, it gets you a step further, but we think, are these demographics really to do something else called capability? So we start to think about how we measure capability, but it turns out it's quite hard, because I can't just go, oh, Lynn, are you legally capable? Because you'd be like, what are you talking about? So we have to think of methods to do that. As far as whether it's the Holy Grail, I think it's got potential to give us far greater insight into who does what and why. What you're touching upon, Lynn, there is, can it be used in some sort of setting about asking questions about, well, what level or form of service people need? So could it be used in a triage type setting? You know, or even whether people are getting in-depth self-help materials as opposed to someone taking them right through the process. And I think there's a lot of potential there. Pulse isn't going to produce a ready-made, this is how you triage people, but it will certainly give you some things which you could test out in practical settings to see if they give you a better handle on what type of service you might give to different clients. I think that's definitely something we're aspiring to.
Because Marie, I could see a point where you might have a matrix, if you like, of legal need and legal capability, and that might deliver better insights into service levels and eligibility. Does that strike you as the sort of outcome that would be useful and likely?
I can probably speak to the useful, not necessarily the likely, because it's well above my pay grade in terms of being able to determine the direction that we'll take. But I would say absolutely useful, and certainly, you know, that nuance around and the intersection, I guess, between need and then capability and even opportunity, you know, as part of that as well. So there is a sense where the more nuance that we can include in particularly that first process, you know, the first point when a client actually reaches a legal service for the first time, the more that process can actually really determine what sort of help that person needs, what level of support that person needs, and direct them really clearly to either more passive assistance if they're able to self-help, or into more intensive supported assistance if they're not. The more efficient our services become as well, but also obviously the quality of service provision and the likelihood of resolving, or at least, you know, moving somebody's legal issue on is much higher.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of other questions which I will put. I think this first one maybe to Hugh. So this is from Karina, who's interested to hear how survey results like Pulse could be relevant to law reform campaigns. So I'll maybe throw this to all three of you. For example, to what extent are fundamental shortcomings in the law or the justice system being considered as explaining a person's experience of the law and their ability or inability to respond to it? I think that's going to capability. Is that how you understand it? But I suppose the broader question there is, okay, so I mean, if we're identifying capability in all its variations, does that throw up some really interesting insights into where laws might need to change in order to respond better?
In the first instance, it's absolutely going to show you where the shortcomings and barriers and where people are getting pretty poor outcomes. And yes, it goes directly to capability, and it will identify areas which are kind of ripe for regulation and reform. One area of particular interest there, which is something which I think will extend far beyond the current Pulse survey, is the legal knowledge scenarios at the outset, which is an aspect of capability. So the idea here is, well, you know, we present people with scenarios and we find out what they think their rights are and whether they think they could deal with these issues. Now, some of those we're going to have problems where they are very close to what the law is, no problem at all. You know, you might just do a little bit of education and prove it. In some cases, we're going to see instances where people's understanding diverges really significantly from what the law is. And I'd say that's got potential to identify some areas that would be ripe for reform.
Yeah, good answer. We might keep the questions moving through. Liz Curran, who was on the line, you'll be pleased to know, Hugh, wonders puts a question for Marie about the areas in the state where there are few VLA officers, and she wonders if some private law firms still do duty lawyer work, and as I understand it, they definitely do, and pro bono work for those who can't pay. And perhaps this is a starting point for getting some insight into private law data. What do you think?
Look, still a really significant proportion of our services are delivered via panel practitioners. And so certainly, a lot of the legal assistance provided through legal aid is provided by panel practitioners. And so we do have a lot of data associated with panel practitioners in that situation. So yes, there's certainly some capacity to look at private firms through that mechanism. Yeah.
And there's a lovely comment. Sorry, on you go.
Could I ask Hugh and Marie a question just while I'm here?
Sure.
It's just to do with, it just struck me looking at all the data that Hugh presented and the data discovery tool. I really love data, and to me it looks kind of like a scary set of very broad resources, and it goes to something Lynn touched upon. But is there a single document that says, this is a good way of doing a local legal needs study? Is there a single thing you can refer to that sets out these are some sensible steps? And also going to the data discovery tool, there's a lot of ways you can chop that up, but I'm assuming that a lot of people are going to come to it wanting some pretty predictable things. Is there a case for a front end that says, do you want to do this? I shall take you through the process, rather than just unleashing people on vast volumes of data.
I might jump up and say, yes, there is a new sort of single approach in CLC's Australia's recent document, which sets out an approach to doing legal needs assessment. And it discusses a number of different activities and suggests you might do them in a sequence, and the nature of the work that you would do at different stages. But it's not overly prescriptive, as in this is a step-by-step single approach. Yeah,
that's certainly been, and we've done a series of training workshops recently with the sector, and obviously there's been a lot of questions to the same effect. And I guess it is difficult because it really does hang on the question you're asking in the first place. And so it's very hard to define this is the template you use in order to lay out legal needs. And even these are the exercises to undertake, because as the two examples that I presented earlier would show, that there are questions underlying that, and the way you go about that work and the sort of data you collect and all of those things are very much determined by those starting points, those questions. So I guess we have produced, a kind of a 2-pager saying, here's some things to think about at the start, here's some things to think about as you go, but it's still very much in that kind of questioning, framing way of going about it, rather than just saying fill in dot point A and dot point B and bam, here you go, here's your legal needs analysis, because it doesn't really lend itself to that, because it is very much about what's the problem you are identifying, and then how do you go about creating an evidence base for that problem that will help you establish a solution. That's really what a legal needs analysis helps you do.
I think it often comes back to how you frame the question, and that's something you've just alluded to, Marie, and I'm sure Nigel, with decades of questionnaire experience, would agree. Depending on how you put the question and how tightly you frame it, and how accessible it is, can have a huge bearing on what you then go looking for. So really understanding what it is that you want to ask is, I think, a key step that people often regard as fairly straightforward, but can be, I think, improved significantly with some greater commitment of time. So getting your question right, or your line of inquiry right, can really, I think, save you a lot of grief through the process and at the end, and you actually get what it is you're after. We will need to wrap it up, very sadly there. I've got several more questions to put, but we'll have to save those for another day. But please join me in thanking very much indeed Marie Baird, Hugh McDonald and Nigel Balmer for their presentations today. It's been terrific discussion, and one I know that will spark lots of further conversation around the joint as we see more and more of this kind of thinking and activity coming through. And just a couple of other notes for you. We will, as we said earlier, distribute the video of this and the slides. And you're probably aware, if you've been on this mailing list for a bit, that we run our research network events every quarter. And we aim to bring you interesting, innovative approaches to data and to understanding who's doing what around the nation, the state, and the world. So if you've got any thoughts about what you'd like to see or explore or understand better, or if you've got something great you'd love to share with us, please, please, please get in touch with our team here. Tennille Hagland is the best contact. And we very much look forward to hearing from you and to sharing the love. It's really critical that we make the most of what everybody's up to. Thank you very much indeed to everyone for attending today. Feel free to spread the word about this event, to send the video around to as many people as could bear to watch it, and keep an eye out for our next event in August. And if you haven't signed up for the emails, I thoroughly recommend that you do that, and then you can stay right on top of all our research network events. So thanks again to the panelists and to you for coming, and have a lovely afternoon.